Hi everyone, thank you for coming this afternoon, this sunny afternoon to the Innovation Center here at BBVA. This is our 11th edition? 12? No? 12? Oh. A lot. Thank you for coming. This one is a really nice edition for us. Also, we are lucky to have here the team from XPLANE that have a lot of experience of what we are doing somehow here at BBVA. That is how to transform a big organization with a lot of people with a lot of different interests and backgrounds into a design-driven organization, or how to use design to transform a huge organization like this. This topic of this talk this afternoon is also something you want to listen, like many others that we have in previous edition. After we have the drinks and you talk with us and you say, hey, why you don't do that? And finally we end with something like this, inviting somebody to have this talk. Also, you already have a look at the materials for the work session. We are going to do a small workshop, really small, because we don't have that much time, but it's nice. Also, we have a lot of interest in our team with the materials, and a lot of people was during that week taking a look on what we are going to do this today with XPLANE. And that's all. I just want to say that Dave King is a really well-known practitioner in the area. He has more than 20 years doing that with corporations, with startups, with NGOs, with big companies, in small teams, with large teams, and in many different ways of working. I hope you enjoy, and thank you for coming this afternoon. I leave you with Dave. Thanks, Dave, for coming here.
Thanks, Sandra. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to try to speak up. And I will try to speak slowly as well. I always try to pick the energy up and speak too fast. So if I'm speaking too fast, please wave at me, throw something at me. That's completely fine. And I'll say also thank you for coming out on this beautiful afternoon, early evening to come into this space. You will leave with new tools and techniques you can apply to your work tomorrow. That's always our goal when we design a workshop, so that's my promise to you, that you'll go away with something. It's not theory. We're actually giving you the tools and techniques, the framing, how we think about organizational change and how we design organizational change. So I'll start with that. And when I say we, I mean we XPLANE. How many people have heard of XPLANE before, prior to this? Okay, perfect. That's kind of what I imagined. We actually used to have an office here about 10 years ago that didn't survive the economic downturn of 2008, unfortunately. So XPLANE is a design consultancy, and it's focused on the inside of organizations. So we make that distinction because a lot of design consultancies are focused on products and services and markets, things outside of organizations. We're much more interested on the inside of an organization, the culture, the processes, the strategy. How do you get large groups of people aligned and executing around common vision, common strategy to achieve whatever it is they're trying to achieve? And again, bringing design to do that, using design to do that. I won't go any further than that. This really is the problem we face most of the time. This is the big challenge that we're often faced with, and it's strategy activation. And on the left side, you've got a small group of people, often a leadership team, who comes up with a new plan, whether it's a new company strategy, or doesn't even have to be a leadership team. It could be a small group of people who come together and say, this is our new process, or this is our new customer experience that we want to deliver to our customers, right? It could be a design team that comes up with that new customer experience. They then have to take that out. So whether it's a senior leadership team or a small design team from deep within the organization, they then need to bring that out into the organization and explain it to them and get everybody to agree to it, and they understand their role and how they're going to participate and help deliver or execute whatever that strategy is, whatever it might be. Again, and that can be process. It can be a culture. You might say our new strategy is a culture of innovation. Great. How do you get 100,000 people, 50,000 people from in one office from around the world, understanding what that is and what their role is in that challenge? So what I'm going to show you again is the high-level framing of how we go about that and how it's a design, how it is a design approach. To do this, I have to switch presentations briefly. I haven't tried this with this switcher yet. It works beautifully. Excellent. So what we're talking about is design and change, organizational change. And you saw in the previous slide, it was called strategy activation. It's the same thing. It's the same idea. All new strategies bring about change. Right? Anything new into an organization is change inside the company. So we use it interchangeably all the time. So we're talking about design plus change. So my goals for you, I've got two goals. The first is, it's nice having this wall over here. I've got sort of a teleprompter. To inspire you to see organizational change as a design system and not a management system. Historically, organizational change is a management challenge. I was going to say managerial consultancy kind of challenge. They bring in Bain or bring in McKinsey to help us drive this change through the organization. So that's not as much the case anymore, and I'll get into that. The other thing is to introduce you to some practical frameworks for activating change. Again, you'll be able to leave here with some tools and techniques you can apply in your work. So let's take a look at design and change and talk a little bit more about kind of the old school of change versus the new school. And when I say the old school, this is the established, for the last 50 or so years, the practice of change management that has developed. And the new school is more in the last 5 to 10 years, arguably. Some people could say 15 years. It's sort of all the new ways of working that are coming with the flood of technology and generational shift and all those kinds of things. But with the old school of change management, it is very much about change management, stakeholder alignment, driving adoption, cascade down through the organization, fix gaps and problems, follow a process. In fact, you'll often hear people say, we need a change management roadmap, as if changing how 100,000 people work follows a predictable roadmap. Because organizations don't change, people change, right? So that's actually where that change management methodology, that older change management methodology falls down. It's because it treats an organization, it treats a company full of people like a machine. And people don't respond like machines, they don't work like machines. So in the new school, it's more about vision activation, stakeholder engagement, right? Who has to change? And let's actually go talk to them about that change. So you get into authentic participation and co-creation. This is the vision we're going for. You run the IT department. How would you change it? What needs to change to get to here? Talk to your team about that and let us know what needs to change. That kind of communication and engagement with the team is different than driving down on them and forcing change onto them. So it's co-creation, building on bright spots and successes, so what's working and what can we continue with that, and then designing from principles. The difference between the old school and the new school, I always summarize it as the old school makes people a victim of change. Change happens to you. The new school is you become a soldier in the fight. You are enlisted into the change. You're asked to come and participate in it. It's not put upon you. You get a voice in the change and how you're going to evolve and change. I'll stop saying change at some point tonight. So the 8 principles of change. So I noticed some folks looking through this. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I did want you to have this. So we spent about 3 or 4 months of kind of an internal project to go back through a lot of old projects. We looked out at a lot of change methodologies, a lot of the established methodologies, Cotter, the McKinsey way, the Accenture way, Bain, Boston Consulting. Everybody's got their methodology. We sort of went through all of those things and said, what makes these work? When change is effective, what happens? What is present? And we came up with these 8 areas, or these 8 ideas, and I won't read through them much. I won't read through them, actually. And it summarizes like this, and I will read this, that organizations that thrive in changing circumstances behave more like organisms than machines. They adapt and evolve rather than reprogram and retool. They share common DNA that helps them bend without breaking. It's the adapt and evolve aspect of this that, again, is contrary, goes against the old school of change management, which assumes it's a predictable process, that people in the organization will behave in a more predictable way, a more structured way. And it's just not true. Organizations are made up of people. It's going to behave more like an organism. So, 3 frameworks that I want to introduce to you. The first is the change lever. This is, these will get more granular as we go down through them, by the way. So with the change lever, you can actually look at this in terms of the physics of a lever and how it works. So you've got a current state where you are today and an idea of a future state of what you want to get to. And what you want to do is lift the organization to that point. So there's the activation down the other side. What will it take to push and force and get from current state to future state? That's kind of simple enough on its own, but then you add where is the triangle on the bottom? Where's that fulcrum point underneath? Because if it's further left, then the organization is adaptive. It means it can change pretty easily. If it goes further right, the organization is entrenched. It's going to resist change quite a bit, and it's going to take a lot of force to push up to the current state. Adaptive organization, Nike is a very adaptive organization. Apple is a very adaptive organization. They change and evolve all the time. Entrenched might be, I'll pick on one of the big oil companies. Right? They do what they do in a repeated way on a global scale. It's very hard to get them to shift and change something else. They're built for scale and repetition, so change is quite hard. They're entrenched. So this is a tool that's quite useful to talk about change at a very high level, frankly almost an executive level or even at a high planning level. When you want to get down into the kind of the managerial level and start talking about where the change is happening, and I think about this as locating the change. This is, we call this the 8 dimensions of an organization. And you can have, frankly, 12 dimensions. You can have 15, you can have 3, right? Some people just say people, process, technology, right? Those are three dimensions of an organization. We've landed on these 8. They work for us. Sometimes we add to it. Sometimes we take it away. The way you use this is you say, okay, there is this new strategy coming into the organization. What is going to change and where and how much? And what needs to change first so that we can change something else next? How does it prioritize? How does it cascade through the organization? It helps you make sense, and it helps managers. It helps staff as well think about, gives them a structured way to talk about the change and as it's hitting them. I'll give you an example. If let's say a magazine that's always been print is shifting to online. That's a pretty big change. That's a shift in strategy, right? That's a shift in publishing strategy, let's call it. We'll make up a name for it. What's going to change there? Okay, so you're now the management team. Where do you think the biggest impact to change is? So the strategy, the vision and mission is changing. Strategy's changing. Where do you think some of the biggest impacts are? Process, the publishing process. How you get something actually out the door is going to change. Systems and tools, absolutely. Publishing to digital versus publishing to print. So the tools will be consistent up to a point, and then they'll probably shift and change a little bit. The behaviors, yeah. The how they actually get it out the door. The publishing cycle is probably going to increase. Actually, I've seen this with a lot of papers, or a lot of magazines lately, where they used to publish on a monthly cycle. Now they're publishing daily. That's a huge shift in behavior and mental model and the kinds of stories you're going to take in. Talent would then be impacted. Structure might be impacted. So oftentimes, a lot of the circle is impacted. You can talk about degree of impact, but this gives you a structured way to have that conversation, as opposed to what ends up otherwise being a very free-form and confusing conversation of people kind of worried and arguing around a table. This lets you, the way we use this tool primarily is as a workshop tool to engage people to say, this is the new strategy, this is where we're going, what's going to change for you? And you can talk to executives that way, you can talk to their teams that way, you get a consistent framework of conversation. The last tool is the one we're going to work with the most during the workshop. This is the activation curve, as we call it. It's also sometimes called the adoption curve. It was developed The original version was developed by a change management consultant in the early 80s. I always forget his name. I need to remember it to give him credit. But this is our version. There are a number of versions out there. So the first model we looked at, the change lever, was at a very high organizational level, even just sort of a starting point. The 8 dimensions of the organization was kind of at an organizational level. Where is change happening? The purpose of this curve is to talk about people and to use it to diagnose where people are, plan how you're going to move them up the curve, and measure where they are as they move up the curve. You can really use it for all 3 of those things. So people hear about a change, they believe it eventually, and they start to live it. And as they do, they go along these points. And this is almost like a grieving process. If you're familiar with the stages of grief, right, where you first deny, you deny the pain, you're angry about it, you bargain about it. There's a whole process that you go through. This is sometimes a little like that. If the change is big enough and it's affecting you strongly enough, let's use that print example. Let's say I'm the manager of the print process inside that company. I'm going to be pretty unhappy about the change that's hitting me, and it's going to take a lot to get me to shift to digital, because I spent the last 25 years of my life getting really good at the print side. Now you're asking me to do something different. It's going to take a lot to move me up the curve, as opposed to maybe some of the designers in the company who've been really excited to get to digital and use it. It's going to take nothing to move them up the curve. So we're going to get into more detail about how we use this actually right now. So I won't go into too much more detail about that. Something else that was crossing my mind. Well, we'll get to it. So these are the worksheets that you have. The first one is you can see has the change lever on it. And then in the boxes, there's sort of who's your audience, what is their future state, and what is your current state. I'll go through this in more detail in the how-to. I just want to give you kind of a tour of it. And then you can see we've turned the activation curve on its side. So hear it, believe it, live it. The second sheet is a menu of ideas. And these are pulled from projects that we've done, projects that we've seen, just best practices out in the world. And basically you use the content of the menu to fill the content of the worksheet here in a second. And I'll show you how to do that. Show you an example of that here in a moment. This is, by the way, this is where basically this becomes a design problem. I mean, we've been using some design methodology up to this point, but now we're really getting into designing that change, moving somebody up the curve. So again, you've got the worksheet on one side and the idea menu on the other. Here's an example. So let's say you have a sales team, and this is a very common change. We run across this quite a bit lately, where what we want them to be doing in the future state is to sell in a more consultative way. They want them to engage with their customers, really understand their problem, have a longer discussion about what they're trying to achieve and how can we help you really get to your goals. It's a much more consultative approach to sales, as opposed to what they're doing right now, which is more transactional. They hold up a menu and say, what do you want? We've got 5 different things. You can buy A, B, C, or D. You can buy A, but not with B. And it's much more transactional. I don't even need to know what your problem is. I'm just going to offer you the menu, and you're going to buy from me. It's a big shift in behavior. So if you're to think about moving that sales team up the curve from the first time they hear about, hey, we're shifting, we're going to take the practice you've gotten good at, you've spent the last, again, 20 or 25 years getting good at sales in a transactional model, we're going to shift you now to doing sales in a consultative model. That's a very difficult change, actually. That's a hard thing to get them up and across that to the point where they're actually living it and doing it well and enjoying it and feeling like they're good at it again and hitting their numbers and making their bonuses. There's a lot at stake for these guys. So I've just put in some preliminary things. I'd actually double the number of things that it would take to get them up the curve here. But you might start with a presentation in a town hall meeting. You might put out an animation of what does consultative sales mean? What does that even look like? So we can start to align around a common definition. And at this point, they've heard about the change. You've communicated with them. And by the way, most people think organizational change, when they think about an organizational change, right, go all the way back to, when this group on the left-hand side finishes their work of coming up with a new strategy, it's probably 3, 6, it may be 12 months of work that they've gone through that time. They're done. All they want to do is communicate to the organization and tell the organization this is it, you're going to come along, and once they hear about this, they're going to love it, they're going to be excited. They just need to understand the new strategy. Once they understand the new strategy, they're going to get on board with it. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Excuse me. Is that ever true? It's almost never true, right? In fact, the more you throw a strategy or a change into an organization, the more resistance there will be to it. But again, the change team, the team that came up with the change is tired. They don't want it. They don't want any more to do with it. Just communicate, just tell them about it. We'll get it out there and away it'll go. So they often stop at the hear it phase. That's what communication does. It stops at just the hear it phase. If that's where you need them to be, if they don't need to work differently or do anything differently, then that's great. That's as far as they needed to get. That's probably not the case. We need the sales team living it. So if they stop at hear it, the strategy's going to fail. It's going to, instead of taking 1 year of hard getting them there, it's going to take 3 to 5 years of passive aggressive, people dropping out of the company, new people coming into the company, missing sales. It's going to hurt the business quite a bit. So into the believe it phase, which is often a learning phase. And believe it is also often a point at which they get to say this will never work and tell you all about why it'll never work. So it's this again is really where there's a lot of tension. So you might develop some playbooks and toolkits to help them be more consultative. You got to give them and enable them that process, and then give them some instructor-led training. You might add some role play training. You might hire some new people in to bring that knowledge into the organization. Again, this is all a design problem. I've taken the audience and I have an understanding that they're going to be very resistant to this. So I'm thinking in terms of what is it going to take to get them to where they need to be? How are we going to support them? I mean, really genuinely, you're actually trying to think about how you're going to support them. Into the live it phase, maybe you've got change ambassadors, maybe you've got feedback loops, you might have best practices getting cycled and circled around with people. There's all kinds of tools you would use. So this is just one team. This is just the sales team that we're talking about. If the change is big enough, so let's go back to from print publication to digital publication. Excuse me, fighting a cold. You might have to actually develop a much more robust communication and engagement plan. And this is an example of a real communication plan that we developed for an organization in the United States. They were shifting from an Oracle ERP system to an SAP ERP system. So they're shifting a huge foundational piece of software in the organization to a new version of it. So if you kind of look at this, we've got awareness, training, and go live, right? There's some hear it, believe it, live it, lay it out in it. And then down the left-hand side is the segmentation of the organization. So we thought about who are the different groups in the organization that are most deeply impacted by this, and what is it going to take to move them through this process. And you'll notice the first column, and I apologize you can't read it. That's a little by design, actually, just being protective of the client's information. But the first column is a presentation. It's a big picture of what's happening and why, right? So tell everybody that same story. And then into the next step, you can see it starts to get a little different. The executives at the top have maybe a presentation given to them so they can tell the story. The change ambassadors at the next level have a toolkit to help them take it out into the organization. Below that, there's, again, animations and websites. There are all these tools, and there's communication and engagement tools. That's really the two words we use all the time. Communication and engagement. Communication and engagement. The engagement is as important as communication. In fact, I often think in terms of hear it is communication, believe it is engagement. You've got to go talk to people to get them to where you want to get them. So you can see all the rest of the mechanisms, but again, this becomes a design system. Here are all the communication and engagement tools we need to move the organization from where they are today through hear it, to believe it, and into living it. And by the way, at the start, this is your best guess. You're going to get halfway through this, obviously, and it's a design process. You're going to make adjustments and evolve through it. So just a couple of quick examples. This is a toolkit that was designed for both for engagement, learning, and planning. And this organization was shifting, this was a global IT off of 9 different core IT platforms were changing and evolving. So they needed to go out and engage the organization. We actually made it into a bit of a game. So you could understand today versus tomorrow, but this is an engagement. So this is in the middle part of the curve, this tool. This is one individual piece. Something of more of a program. This is for a large finance firm that is getting a handle around their data governance. Data governance, data management is a big deal, obviously, inside finance firms. For this, there are visual maps and presentations. There are animations. There are design sprints at work. There are engagement workshops. There's a change ambassador toolkit. There's training and playbooks that are deployed. There are management dashboards that are developed and feedback loops. There are all kinds of mechanisms into that communication and engagement plan. These are just some of the tools so you can get a sense of what they are, what that starts to look like. So back to your assignment, what we're going to do in the workshop. I'm going to stop talking now in a second. Again, you've got the worksheet. You can use the example I gave of either the shift from digital to print, or you can use the sales team, or you can draw something from your own work, which I would actually encourage you to. If you're going through a change, or you see a change, or you'd like to have a change, fill out the worksheet with something real in mind, and then using the idea menu as a way to populate it. And bring your own ideas to it too. These can be prompts. You'll also notice on the idea menu the little colored dots next to each idea. That corresponds with different stages of the curve, right? There's a gray, a dark gray, and a yellow. You'll start to see. Those aren't hard, fast rules, but there's just a good indicator of where things typically go. So when you're done, this is what I'd love for you to have created, at least one of these. And you might create more than one, go through the process a couple times just to get good at it. Again, when we design this at a large-scale organizational level, the first thing we'll do is go through a segmentation process so that we know who all the target audiences are. Because you might have 10, you might have 30 target audiences, and you're going to want to do this exercise for each one. And to do it really properly, you might do some empathy mapping and some interviews, and right, you do more design research as input into the process. We don't have that luxury here tonight, so you're going to have to kind of project a little bit, but just so that you know that usually you want to make sure you really understand the audience and where are they today in relationship to the change that's coming to them. By the way, that leadership team on the left-hand side will always overestimate by an incredible amount where the organization is in relationship to their new strategy, their new idea that they're bringing. They most of the time think, in fact, we'll hear CEOs say this all the time, I gave a town hall, I gave a presentation, why isn't the organization following the strategy? It's amazing how often that happens. And again, they've lived with it for 6 months, 12 months. It's so ingrained. They're so far up they're at the live it phase. They've been at the live it phase for a long time. They forget that the organization is just hearing about it for the first time. So, this is the assignment. Work alone if you'd like to work alone. Work in pairs or work in threes if you'd like to. It can be helpful the first time you go through it to kind of talk with somebody and kind of bounce some ideas off of it. There are 4 explainers here. Shane is here. Sean and Herman are in the back there. We'll come around and you can grab us. We'll just kind of drift around. Grab us if you have a question or you'd like some help with anything. And otherwise, I'm going to let you do the exercise for a bit, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end in case you're holding on to anything right now. I just want to let's get into the workshop part of this because I've been talking for too long. Sounds good? Begin.